All right, so this story goes back to December 13, 1983. Okay, this is the 1983-1984 basketball season, and this is the story of the highest scoring game in NBA history. Hey guys, I got to pause the story for a second here. I had to do a quick edit. This is really, really crazy. So, yeah, this comes out on Monday, February 27th, and I recorded this back, a couple days ago on Friday the 24th. And again, this story is about the highest scoring game in NBA history. It just so happened that that night, the second highest scoring game occurred in NBA history. It was a double overtime game between the Sacramento Kings and the LA Clippers. Sacramento won 176 to 175. De'Aaron Fox led the Kings with 42 points, and Malik Monk Malik Monk led the Kings with 45 points off the bench. So De'Aaron Fox had 42 points. Malik Monk had 45 points. For the Clippers, Kawhi Leonard had 44. Paul George had 34. Just an incredibly high scoring game, which again, just absolutely crazy that a few hours after I was telling my story about the highest scoring game in NBA history, the second highest scoring game in NBA history was played. All right, so here we go. Back to the story. I think it is a definite reflection on how the game of basketball has changed. This game was played in Denver. Both teams were around 500. This is before the bad boy era for the Detroit Pistons. They were starting to kind of creep on a come up. Isaiah Thomas was a young player on that team. Bill Laimbeer was a young player on that team. Kelly Tripucka was a young player on that team. Not one of the bad boys. Not on the team when they did win the championship a few years later. Vinnie Johnson was a young player on that team. The Denver Nuggets, on the other hand, featured some pretty good players as well. Kiki Vanderweg, Alex English, one of the best scorers of all time, Dan Issel. So definitely some really good young NBA talent featured in this game. The final score of the game was 186 to 184. Now the game, to be fair, did go into 3 overtimes, but look at some of these quarter scores. Okay, after the first quarter, the Pistons had 38 points. All right, they scored 38 points in the first quarter. They were up 4. In the second quarter, the Nuggets scored 40 points, and then they scored 39 more in the third quarter. Both teams scored over 30 points in all 4 quarters. And then went on to like I said, three different overtimes. In this game, Isaiah Thomas led all scorers with 47. Oh, I'm sorry, that is incorrect. Kiki Vanderweg led all scorers with 51 points, followed by teammate Alex English, who had 47 points, and then Isaiah Thomas led the Pistons with 47 points himself. John Long for the Pistons had 41. Kelly Tripucka chipped in with 35. And as I mentioned, a young Bill Laimbeer had 17 points. Young Vinnie Johnson, he had 12 points off the bench. Dan Issel also scored 28 points for the Denver Nuggets. So we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 players in that contest scored over 20 points. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 players scored over 30 points. And, 4 players scored over 40 points. So what an incredible game. But here's why the story is interesting, okay? Again, highest scoring game in NBA history. Let's look at three-pointers, okay? The game of basketball now today is definitely based around the three-point shot. I think, you see 3 after 3 after 3 after 3 attempted. Let's look at the box score here and let's see three-pointers for the Detroit Pistons. They attempted 2 three-pointers in the game. 4 quarters, 3 overtimes, they attempted 2 three-pointers. Isaiah Thomas hit 1, and actually he attempted both. So Isaiah Thomas was 1 for 2 from 3, and that was it. That was it for the Pistons. Okay, 2 3-point attempts. All right, if you look at the Denver Nuggets, Dan Issel was 0 for 1, and Richard Anderson hit 1 off the bench, 1 for 1. So the Denver Nuggets were 1 for 2. 2 3-point attempts for the Denver Nuggets, 2 3-point attempts for the Detroit Pistons, a total of 4 3-pointers attempted in the entire basketball game. 2 were made, and yet we had a score of 186 to 184, with only 6 of those points coming from behind the three-point line. So the game is just totally different now today, and this game is just crazy to me. So that is story time with Kurt here on the Attack the Rack podcast. Again, brought to you by Realtor Ryan. All right, guys, before we move on, I want to now that I have told the story of the highest scoring game in NBA history, and then also talked about there before I started about how just Friday night we had the second highest scoring game in NBA history. I want to go through a few numbers for you in that game. Okay, remember I said there was 4 three-pointers attempted in the Nuggets Pistons game back in 1983. Friday night in the Kings Clippers game, there was 86 three-pointers attempted. Okay? Nuggets Pistons game, 4 three-pointers attempted. 20 or 30, 40 years later, Clippers Kings, 86 threes attempted. Back in the 83 game between the Pistons and the Nuggets, there was 2 three-pointers made the entire game. In Friday night's game between the Kings and the Clippers, there was 44 three-pointers made. 2 three-pointers made 40 years ago in the highest scoring game in NBA history between the Pistons and the Nuggets. And then 40 years later, in the second highest scoring game in NBA history, 44 threes made. There was a total Friday night of 209 field goals total attempted. So that's a combination of 2s and 3s. 209 total field goals attempted. Again, of those 209, 86 were three-pointers. That means that 40% of the shots taken Friday night were three-pointers. In the Pistons game, there was 251 total field goals, and again, only 4 of those field goals were 3-pointers. That was 1.5% of all shots taken in that game were threes. Again, Friday night in the Kings Clippers game, 40% of the shots taken were threes. So, yeah, it is safe to say the game has changed for better or worse. That is up to all of us to decide on our own.